Hi, everybody. This is Chris Lim with Theotech, and today I'm working with Jodie Loi, who is a UX designer who has just completed a usability study on some of our Codex concept prototypes. And I wanted to share her findings with all of you and be able to talk about it with her. So, Jodie, thanks for joining us on this little StreamYard.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm shy. There's so many invisible audience that I may not be able to see right now.
Well, it might just be people on the forum or something like that. So no worries. But thanks for doing the, this usability study with 6 people, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, 6 people.
And I think that you just shared some insightful things from what you found that I wanted to record. But just for context, I'll go ahead and kind of read your introduction for this. Codex is a biblical product discovery project that has been going from December. It's exploring the future of digital first church. And we have introduced it as a spatial Bible experience for both synchronous and asynchronous engagement with scripture. And it visualizes the Bible instead of as pages, as spaces where verses, books, chapters, everything is kind of laid out in a 3D, or not 3D, a canvas that you can zoom in and zoom out to. The books are side by side. We can show arcs to connect different books, basically like Google Maps, where the map is the Bible. And we can also support engagement with the community through being in a social space together. And so right now we're going to talk about some of the discoveries that you made from the interviews that you did. And I guess here it says that you're going to study existing Bible reading context, habits, virtual and physical Bibles for both individual and group studies, whether or not this navigation and interface for Codex is easy to learn, it's learnability, as well as whether or not it is desirable. Is it better than what they could do today, or open up possibilities that they couldn't imagine before? So with that, I'll let you take it away with this participant section.
All right. So we've got 6 people who actually interacted with our Codex prototype. One of them was your friend, Chris, and then the rest were kind of friends and family around me. And the bulk of them were actually, I guess, young adults who were quite eloquent with the Bible. And then there was also my dad, who's this 64-year-old retired male. And so with how I run the studies, I first had a contextual interview trying to understand how they use their Bible in their daily lives. And from there were a few interesting insights. So I can run through them first, and then anything interesting, I'll continue on and talking about it. So one thing was that the physical Bible is actually a preferred medium even now because of digital distraction that exists today. And this is something that affects mostly people around our age because we are so prone to, notifications on our messages. It just becomes a habit for our hands. So my friends actually did say, okay, I use it in the morning during quiet time with a physical book. And it's nice to actually have electronics completely away.
Mm-hmm.
And another participant also said that it's actually something that she makes it a point to keep electronics away when she's alone, especially because there's that lack of accountability when you're by yourself. Yeah. So that's one point. Alternatively, the digital Bible is actually something that they bring along wherever they go. And so that's the case for people going for church, going for sermons, or when they're out, when they're doing Bible studies, even when they're on the go. But another thing that is added here is for someone like my dad, which I thought, okay, he's like a boomer, he's he's older. I would expect that someone like him actually would prefer a physical Bible, but no, it turns out that this is his preferred kind of tool of choice because one thing is vision impairment. Like he's much older now and he can't actually see the small text on a physical Bible. He'd have to turn up like a special reading light and then bring something to zoom the words in. So he actually prefers the phone. We've got like a large text setting available already, and because language was an issue for him, like English is actually his second language and he's still doing Bible studies in English. So he's actually able to refer to things like the Easy English commentary that explains not just in simple English of the context, but then he's also able to switch it around with different Bible versions. So like the American Amplified Bible, which he really enjoyed, and also lots of different Bible apps to test out. So he's someone who's a little bit more experimental and always trying new apps. Like for a lot of us, we stick to something like YouVersion, which is currently probably the biggest Bible app that exists now. But he uses something called like Pocket Sword, and I actually have like a screenshot of how he does his notes. And
if you want to share your screen,
and
you have the
if you
ability
just
to
scroll
do
down,
that.
if you can just scroll down, I put like a little picture there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So and that's how he kind of uses it. He has an app that contains actually cross references on all these blue links there, and he can actually see the meanings of the words in Hebrew, and then he combines that with his OneNote, where he actually copies, say, the whole chunk. For example, in this one, he's actually looking at Mark 9, so he copied the whole chapter of Mark 9 and put his own notes color coded in red.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how someone like him does note taking, and
He's a very
prepares for his
sophisticated
homework.
user. I think
Yeah.
that's a deep Bible study there with 3
Yeah.
different tools. It's amazing.
Yeah, and then he was just complaining, oh, why do people stick with PowerPoint? Because with something like that, there's no limit to how much he can type as well, right? And it's so much easier to format that way.
Inside
Yeah.
OneNote.
Yeah, inside OneNote. Yeah, and I think another point about translations was brought up by your friend as a German speaker, where he actually mentioned that using translations has been helpful to kind of get the accuracy of meaning and extracting that from different passages. So yeah, so
And
that's
he was
kind of like
also he was conducting a Bible study with people who are bilingual, multilingual. Some people have German as their second language, and so that's why having the English as a reference was helpful. And yeah, that's why using the multiple languages was really needed to be able to support that Bible study.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. A similarity there. And another thing was how important note taking was, like as part of engagement with the Bible and in the sessions that we are going through when we are studying the Bible, say in sermons or in Bible study. So I mentioned earlier about the notes that my dad took, but then alternatively, we had other participants who would be writing on their iPad, and then people who wrote on paper itself, just so that there's engagement with that what they're learning on that spot. Yeah, even though I didn't continue with like the quotes here, but what went on with the last interview was that this participant actually doesn't keep her notes. It was really for that sole moment of engagement and kind of understanding what was being taught to her at that moment that was important to her. So she did mention that she doesn't really refer to her notes after.
So she throws them away when she's done, or just puts them in a binder and never looks at them again.
Yes, something like that. And I guess it's hard because these are physical notes as well. So if you do want to find something, you must remember clearly what that was, compared to pressing like Command F and then finding a specific word. Yeah, so that's the downside compared to. Yeah.
It's just interesting because I always did feel like physical notes were not often that useful. The main use was to engage with the idea, and then later maybe it's more useful when you apply it to your life. Once it's integrated in your life, you don't need the notes anymore.
Yeah,
it's just a part of
definitely.
you. But then with the digital, I agree that having the ability to search is so useful because you can easily reference stuff from the past.
Yeah. And I'm someone who really liked physical notes as well, but after going on with digital notes, it's just convenient to search and go like, oh yeah, that was something we learned before, especially with everything on the cloud. And then the last point was on virtual Bible studies. So I think we had your friend MS and another JS there. Both of them were conducting Bible studies virtually, and there was a little bit of a struggle with this change of interface. So one thing was a distraction again, because people are in a different zone. Of course, there may be contexts where people are actually, taking care of the kids and you can't help it. But a lot of time it's just you're prone to distraction because people can't see what's on your screen, right? And another thing was that people could stay mute and not interact, and they could remain that way. So that was an issue, having to focus on how do you ensure engagement and interaction during the time that we have together in this session as a group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a struggle. And I think your friend actually tackled it really well. So his method was where he was always asking questions and summarizing responses as a facilitator more than like someone who was a preacher and having a strong narrative that they wanted to kind of impart to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that's a good style to go by.
Yeah, the facilitation is essential with this virtual small group stuff, because otherwise it does become like just like preaching or something, and then that's you can just watch a live stream or a YouTube video. You have to have the interactivity. Now, he did find that when there's more than 8 people, it was just more challenging. You had to kind of rethink the format of the Bible study, because you just can't interact with 8 people simultaneously.
And I guess it's tricky because that so much responsibility is on you as the facilitator, and how would you then share that with others, right?
It is kind of tricky, but I think that especially if it's a small group of friends and stuff, then it's not hard to pass the baton. It's like, this week is my turn, next week is your turn, the week after is your turn. We're all friends here, so it's not that much pressure. It's actually healthier, probably, because then you get different people's styles.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. So the first one by JS was kind of a training at church with other leaders first, before reflecting on the verses herself, then collating on questions and verses that stood out, and then searching for commentaries only after that, so that she has an idea of what God spoke to her first. And then kind of backing that up from commentaries, articles, and notes that were relevant, and then holding the Bible study from there. And I thought this point was, I guess this flow was relevant even for Codex, such that when they do have training and they share their learnings, they share what they thought were relevant, Codex could come in together for them to use the interface and share what they think is important.
So are you saying that it would be something where they could just kind of bookmark or highlight specific verses that they thought were important or something?
Yeah, for people planning out Bible studies. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good
And
snippet.
even for the Bible study execution flow, I remember there was a note said by MS of how before the next Bible study reading, Bible study session, he actually sends out a link to the verses that the members should be reading for the next week. And if they had any questions, having just a space to let that all out, share about what they thought were interesting insights, and also questions that MS then could prepare before the session even started, would be ideal too.
So there's a phase that's asynchronous, not in the meeting itself, where there can be preparation or collection of interesting questions, verses, and other things like that. Yeah, in the asynchronous phase. Okay.
Yeah. So I think moving on from that, then I gave them really simple tasks to kind of understand how this concept worked, how this experience would be like, and then also to understand whether they were able to catch the interactions that were required, because a lot of them came from tools that we were already using. So like Google Maps, we know how the maps work and navigate, or we've got virtual books that we already are highlighting and putting notes on. And I think Codex is kind of like a compilation of that. So it's just simple tasks. Like the first task I gave them was just, navigate to a verse from this homepage where they were able to see the different Bible books. And I think everybody did it their own way, but somehow without touching the search tool. So once they were able to see, there are books laid out in front of me, they would choose to actually just scroll and find the book that I had instructed them to find instead. So I'll be like, find John 3:16, and I'll be like, okay, I think I will just go to John and then click it from there, or zoom in from there, or I'll click on the title itself. Yeah, so that's just some like small details on how they would choose to interact.
Should I be looking at this diagram here, figure 4, or no?
No, it's just an idea of what they were looking at then.
Okay, because you just mentioned about over here, it says that most users did not notice search, prototype UI issue, Is that
Yeah.
actually a prototype issue, or is it actually that they prefer finding?
Yeah, I'm somewhere like in between. I wonder which is which too.
Okay.
We have to discover that again. But I do think like in terms of UI, what catches their eye first was definitely not the search.
Okay.
And because also the whole interface is quite new to them. So they
Yeah.
were kind of interacting with what was novel and what stood out to them first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I know for when I use Google Maps that if I just need to go to a place, I will just type it in because it's too much to
Yeah.
look at. But if I'm trying to find
Mm.
something in an area, like if I'm doing discovery, I actually
Mm.
like to just have the map and kind of scroll around and see like what food is nearby me and where is it. I'm not
Yeah.
trying to search just for the word food necessarily. I might do that just to get results, but I want to look at it on the map form. And I wonder if
Yeah.
something like that could be happening too with like, oh, go to John 3. It's like, oh yeah, like where's John anyway? Like where is it? That's the spatial
Right.
question,
Yeah.
which is so unique to I think this project is you can
Yeah.
find it in a space. It's not just a result in a search box.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
And then after that, I kind of zoomed in with like a prototype screen where people may be interacting with one another in a Bible study and give them a simple instruction because this was zoomed into like I think Genesis 1 or something. So how
Okay.
would you highlight and how would you take notes? And actually the highlighting part was probably the easiest thing that they could do, like, oh yeah, I know, just like drag and scroll over the text
Mm-hmm.
and then like click on highlight or something.
Mm-hmm.
But all the other functions like, oh, maybe if you could put like a text note or something, how would you do that? It was actually difficult because on I guess the interface and there wasn't actually like a titles on these buttons as to what they were doing, and so they were
Mm.
trying to guess what the icons meant, and it was tricky for them since it was their first time looking at a few buttons, and even though it looked familiar, they weren't very sure.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just, yeah, small things to note as to like having to indicate what each button would mean, and
Yeah.
also small details on like, oh, actually having a hover button wouldn't actually be relevant if this was a taskbar that say appeared if they only clicked on like the right click button.
Okay.
Yeah.
A context
So
menu.
yeah, so small things as to how they would interact and when things would pop out were things to note as we were going through this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes
Yeah.
sense. I found that even in Miro, iconic
Mhm.
interfaces, I just don't know what most things mean.
Yeah,
Um,
you really have to interact to know what they are just by trying and
yeah,
failing sometimes. Yeah.
yeah. Same thing with our product Spiffio. Like, I just realized we tried to like one of my designers person tried to use icons only. I was like, no, we have to add text labels because people
People
just don't want
know.
to. They don't want to touch
Yeah.
it.
And they
They
don't
don't.
want
They
to take
don't.
the risk, right?
Yeah, they don't want to
Like,
touch it. They don't know what it's gonna do, and
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting
Yeah.
why iconic only interfaces are popular, but they're really, yeah,
They're not the most effective.
not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. And I guess a way to go around it as I looked at it was also you could either give them prompts on their first like arrival to this page as to, oh, if you click this will happen, so that the users have an idea of what each button does.
Now, this is
Yeah.
interesting. They all wanted to drag and scroll text to highlight, but
Yeah.
drag and scroll means move in a touch
Yeah.
interface, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So drag and scrolls, I think, was most intuitive because they were also thinking of like on a document, say on Google Docs right now, we drag and scroll to
Mm-hmm.
highlight our own text.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a context switch, I guess, from before that when they couldn't see text at all at a zoomed out view compared to now when they're actually looking at text, and hopefully when they do put their mouse near the text, it actually switches to recognize that it's got to change in
I
the near
see.
text. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, like by the end of this case, I or this whole like three tasks that I gave them, I simply asked as to what possible use case they may have for this tool for Codex, and the most popular one was probably Codex for group discussion because it actually invited organic interaction between people.
Mm.
Yeah, so that was probably the one with the most votes, followed by cross-referencing and also combining that with note-taking. So these were pretty straightforward. And I like how my friend just called it a Bible whiteboard, which is kind of true.
That is accurate, I think, in some
Yeah.
ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and also with group discussions, I guess a perk with this is that people can go hands free, and like your friend mentioned, the example of a mother minding her kids, she'd still be able to follow what's happening on the screen quite easily.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so they don't have to actually be interacting. They can be along for the journey.
yeah.
What was so right here, the number of votes, multiple allowed.
Mm.
Was there anything where anybody did not vote? Because it doesn't add up to,
Oh yeah. So I think I had one friend who didn't vote. Yeah.
Okay,
So that's
I
like
see.
numbers.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
let me just read this real quick.
And then another issue was that, I mean, the example that I had given was of only a smaller group. So when we have, hundreds and thousands following, say, in the context of a sermon, how would things turn out? Yeah. So
Because that was
details
something
like
we did
that.
not actually test with
Look,
them.
yeah,
That would have been the journeys concept, right?
yeah,
Through a text, like the different frames.
yeah. And
Okay.
so, yeah, so that's something to consider. And another thing was about audience confusion with all these connections that we may be putting in place. So I think it was something that we had tested previously, but I just briefly mentioned here, where you're jumping from, like, a place in Psalms all the way to like Mark, and as an audience you'd be kind of confused, like, where am I going? So having to constantly zoom out and make sure that they see where the flow is going, making that clear to them is important too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like zoom into here, zoom out, and then zoom
yeah,
back in over there. Yeah. So
yeah,
they always have context.
yeah. And
Did we
then yeah.
with this capturing notes? I know that we talked about also
Mm.
multimedia. So it's
Oh
not
yeah.
just notes. Do we ever show any of that to them?
No, I didn't get to. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
uh,
Because if it's only text
yeah.
notes, it's like, well, everything I have or I already have does that, right?
Yeah. I did want to put it in, but I just I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I was just
But
curious. So yeah, go
so
ahead.
on towards with the other proposals, they actually I think these few, the ones that we're seeing here with the AI generated graphic representation, that was something that MS had suggested. If there was a certain way to automate these texts into life, and then also having that as a user created database, that would be interesting as well. If users could themselves put all these related images and videos, and we have like well like well would it be strange to say some sort of open source Bible that is personalized by
Yep.
everyone?
That's
Yeah.
not strange at all. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then there was that of the Bible map walkthrough, which is similar to the Assassin's Creed game. That I haven't played Assassin's Creed before, but I
Okay.
thought that was an interesting reference to give. And then there was that of the context capture, so people could easily understand the verses that they were looking at, what was the context behind that. There was also voice activation that was being suggested. And the last point on like elderly friendly or a senior friendly codex was more of an accessibility issue, as the last participant actually gave me a story or a situation of her own Bible study, where there was an old lady who's about 80 who joined them, and they were actually using this Word Go by BSF app for their Bible study, and they had to switch back to Bible study books because the old lady wasn't actually able to remember what was on the previous page. Because when we're on the phone, we actually go through many screens, just tapping here and there.
Yeah.
And so, like, the first screen may be telling you, oh yeah, like, find a verse that speaks about something, 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 and then they click on the next screen, and for us, we're fine. We're like, okay, yeah, let's get to that verse. Whereas the old lady that had joined them wouldn't be able to remember what was on the screen. Basically, whatever was on the screen at the present time was like her world, and that's all that she could remember.
That's
Yeah.
insightful.
So something to cater with this limited memory that they may have, and also vision impairment. So making sure that the text were big enough, and if not, having an audio option.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that, I guess it showed that the concept in itself is effective, and it's actually a good way to combine what we have already to revisualize the Bible. And at the same time, there's for those like new concepts that we may want to put in, it's important to make it learnable for the user. So even adding text in on our icons, and then having simple tutorials, having little prompts for them to try a certain interaction before they go about actually doing something with it, so that
Mm-hmm.
they feel that sense of security that they're not taking any risk.
Yeah.
Would be
Mm-hmm.
important. Yeah, and then after that, following on, besides reiterating on the suggestions that they had offered, I think other things that we may have to consider would be how do we scale it? How do we make it more accessible? How do we personalize this space? Because even though we have spoken that it is very likely that Codex is ideal for group situations, but we have this chance to make it a personalized Bible that we can bring everywhere, wherever we go. And so how might we make this somebody's virtual personal Bible?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then after that, presenting simple arcs and connections that everybody can make and make sense out of it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really good work. So thank you for doing this usability study and also summarizing some of these interesting questions at the end. Was there anything more about translation specifically, like multilingual engagement?
So with multilingual engagement, not like I haven't had like a prototype with translations available, but I do think that's a good point. We could actually put it in our next version to consider, especially because we do have access to multilingual users.
I know. I was just fascinated because
Right?
when I saw
Yeah.
your dad's thing, it's like he's using English for Strong's, and Strong's is actually already multilingual because that's going from Greek and Hebrew, right? And then he has his Chinese Bible over here, but with English
Yeah.
and Chinese notes in there.
Oh yeah, that's his OneNote that he copy and pasted like the Bible verses in, and then he put in his own questions.
Okay. I
Yeah,
just think
and
it's fascinating. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then also the other feedback that you got about how people, especially in our generation, like the physical because it's less distracting.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because it begs the question: is it possible to create a digital distraction-free kind of mode? I know Apple tries with their Reader app, right? Distraction-free mode and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that could bring the benefits of digital with the benefits of physical.
Yeah. And I think it's just like how people have like a Kindle. That's kind of a digital but non-digital thing as well, because you're disconnected still, which is helpful.
You can focus on the reading. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this voice activation, what was that?
Oh, that was brought up by MS actually, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I assume it's actually for people who may not be able to interact with, say, their own hands, or then being able to say, oh, I want to read like John 3:16, and then having
okay.
Codex recognize that. Yeah, something simple. And also, and probably what we had suggested or talked about previously of how people could be reading certain verses and Codex recognizing that, even in a group setting, and highlighting the verses that the speaker may be talking about.
Yeah, we talked about
Yeah.
as a tool, as a simple way that people could use it in their sermons is we could have speech recognition running and then identify whenever a pastor makes an allusion to a specific text, the Codex could just automatically, like a Google Maps, just kind of move to that part of the Bible. And so it can follow the speaker as they're speaking. And that would be a very cool application of speech recognition and this interface, this spatial interface. And then also I can just see how people who have issues with the interface, like with navigating the interface, might prefer using their voice just to say, Codex, take me to John 3:16 or something like that. It's like interacting with a voice assistant like Alexa, right?
Yeah, and I think especially because voice assistants, they're growing at such a crazy pace as well. Soon people would be familiar with using their voice commands to get to places, and that's the same with the Bible map that
Mhm.
we have here.
Yeah. And then one other question, I noticed in one of the prototypes here, you actually had the multi-user presence as a
Yeah,
cursor. How did that work
yeah.
out? Um, did it strike any questions? Did it make sense to people that they could see everybody else's cursor, like in terms of the way to represent their presence in the text?
Oh,
How was that?
actually, no, they weren't surprised at all.
Okay.
Yeah, they just thought, oh yeah, that works. And I thought,
Okay.
okay.
So even like your dad wasn't surprised by that?
No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
guess,
intuitive
yeah,
then.
yeah.
Okay.
It's a good thing. I did
Interesting.
wish they had more reactions on that. What do you think? Oh yeah, cool.
Well,
Okay
it
then.
could be an indication that it means that it's
Yeah.
intuitive, you know? We learned something
Yeah.
that we learned that this iconography does not
Mm.
work. People are confused and scared. We learned that they don't even blink an eye when they see this. There's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's why is it
People.
not? It should just be that way. It just is. Like they just are
Yeah.
used to it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Just
Cool. Well,
as
thank you, Jody. And yeah, I think we're going to take these results and think about how we actually incorporate it into the proposal to hopefully be able to get funding and build the first prototypes of these things, and then we can actually do more testing where people can interact with the prototypes and not just be a mock-up. So thanks for your
yeah.
work, and look forward to taking this to the next steps, God willing.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
Uh-huh.